The Bible says that when Jesus was crucified, that he went in his spirit and preached to the spirits now in prison. What is happening with that? Who are, where are, and when were the spirits put in prison? The Bible says in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 18, "For Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. The Spirit in which also he, Jesus, went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison." The question that we need to answer first is, whoever these spirits are, when were they put in prison? There's a clue to this in verse 20 of 1 Peter chapter 3. Whoever the spirits are, when were they put in prison? A spiritual prison, an abyss, the Bible will talk about, a holding place for a future judgment before being cast in finality into the lake of fire. The Bible says in verse 20, "The spirits now in prison who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah." So when the spirits were disobedient, when this happened, when this judgment was rendered upon these spirits, was during the days of Noah. It says, who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah. But the real question we want to answer is, who are these spirits? 2 Peter chapter 2. The Bible, in seeming to keep with the same theme of the days of Noah, the flood, and God's judgment and spirits, gives us further clarification on who the spirits are, or if you want, what the spirits are. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4 says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness, reserved for judgment." When did this happen? Verse 5, "And did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah." So during the days of Noah, the Bible says that God did not spare certain angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness, the purpose for which reserved for judgment. So who are the spirits now in prison? They are rebellious angels who sinned in the days of Noah, that God put in prison, a prison of spirituality, a hellish place, until a future judgment, in which Jesus went after the crucifixion, before the resurrection, and preached victory over them. You say, well, how do we understand this? Because not all rebellious angels, often referred to in the Bible as devils or demons, those are fallen angels that rebelled against God and were cast out. Not all of them are in prison. Only a unique group named in the Bible is currently in prison. We know this even from the New Testament, because when Jesus came across the sea, far after the days of Noah, he came to a cemetery the Bible talks about in the New Testament, both in Matthew and Mark, when he meets this man, sometimes called the maniac of Gadara, in the cemetery. And what does Jesus encounter? He encounters a man full of evil spirits that are not in prison. When Jesus asks their name, he says, "What is your name?" They respond, "Our name is Legion, for we are many." And what is their request? In fear, they ask Jesus, "It is not at this time that you're going to cast us into the abyss, is it?" So they know about a spiritual prison that some of their cohorts are currently in at that time. And they say, "Are you going to cast us there?" And Jesus says, "No." And he casts them into a nearby herd of pigs, which subsequently run off a cliff and drown. So there is only a unique group named in the Bible called the spirits now in prison right now. Not every demonic spirit is. So the question then is, what did this unique group do that warranted God removing them in entirety from the face of the earth and putting them in a hellish prison awaiting judgment? That question is answered in the book of Jude, chapter 1 and verse 6. The Bible says, angels. So we now know that they are fallen angels, both from 2 Peter and the book of Jude. These are not spirits or souls of men that are put in prison. It is angels that have fallen because of a certain act that God deemed so bad that this was a unique judgment upon them. Jude 1:6, it says, "And angels," here's their sin, "who did not keep their own domain or rightful place of dwelling, but abandoned their proper abode, He, God, has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day." What did they do? Continuing on in verse 7, "Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they in the same way as these," the spirits now in prison, "since they in the same way as these indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh." They are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. So what seems to have happened is they went after strange flesh in some kind of bizarre, not fully understandable sexual sin. When they left their proper place of angelic dwelling, they became evil spirits. They broke through a barrier that God had set, and God has judged them under eternal bonds. They are the spirits in prison. The only other place this seems to be talked about is Genesis chapter 6, in the days of Noah. "Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God," often in the Bible referring to angels, "saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose." Verse 4, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those, the offspring, were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown."